Welcome to our next episode of ESSA TV. This episode features a conversation with Associate Professor Elias Khalil in the Department of Economics at Monash University. He specialises in behavioural and evolutionary economics. He focuses on rational choice theory with regards to evolution, emotions, ethical judgments, and the behaviour of organisms. His articles appeared in numerous journals, including Economic Inquiry, Cambridge Journal of Economics, and History of Political Economy, to name a few. Associate Professor Elias Khalil, thank you for joining us today.
I'm glad to be here.
You mentioned on your website that your research agenda consists of examining the nexus of rationality, emotions, and ethics. But this goes against the trend in the social sciences in the past few decades. This trend is based on the implied consensus that to forge ahead, social scientists, similar to experimental biologists, should isolate and dissect one behaviour, one emotion, and one ethical dilemma at a time. One should avoid examining the organism or human conduct in total. So how do you justify your research agenda?
Yes, when I try to work through the existing institutions and frameworks, I became dissatisfied the way that the cake is cut, the way that things are compartmentalized. I should add a caveat that there is a great benefit for any normal science, to use that term from Thomas Kuhn, to take a framework or a paradigm and work out its questions to its logical conclusions, and there is great benefit of that. But at the same time, as with any kind of a framework, it has underpinning philosophical and metaphysical foundation, and eventually there will be a lot of issues that would come up, a lot of problems that would come up, and then we have to examine the foundation. So I see my work is not in displacing or substituting what the majority of social scientists do, but it is a complementary that we need voices like the one I'm trying to express, which re-examine the foundation of social theory, political theory, economic theory, and that's what my work does. In a nutshell, my work lies somewhere between the social sciences and philosophy. It's not philosophy per se, and it's not what social scientists do every day, but it is try to examine the foundations. And there is no better than starting with really trying to understand the nucleus behavior or conduct, which combines ethics, emotions, and reason, which are really, unfortunately, now separated into different departments, where ethics is part of philosophy, emotions is the really basic focus of psychology, and reason is one of the two pillars of economics. The other pillar is equilibrium. And so I think that we need to step back and see, before we split and specialize again, to repackage and examine human conduct in its most primitive, in its most ultimate unit, where if you examine any behavior that we do, it involves emotion, there is caring about oneself or someone else who is nearby, it involves ethical consideration, and it involves also cost-benefit analysis, which is reason.
Adam Smith features highly in your academic writings. There are many themes in Smith that you adopt, from his theory of sympathy to the nature of nationalism and the state, to his analysis of the invisible hand. What is the most penetrating idea that you would like to convey to your students about Adam Smith?
Yes, Adam Smith actually is my intellectual hero, and my other intellectual hero is Ibn Khaldun, although I have not written much except a couple notes, a couple notes on Ibn Khaldun. And the reason they are really both are heroes of mine because they made human society and human beings the object of scientific study, similar to stars, rocks, the amoeba, plants are the object of scientific study. And how Ibn Khaldun has done it is saying that the rise and fall of dynasties follow natural laws. It's not the result of the intervention of the deity of God. And the same thing Adam Smith, he said the emotions and ethics and the behavior of humans is really the result of basic, ultimate feelings. He calls it sympathy. And we don't really need to appeal to the gods or a deity to explain the system of morality. And so both of them lay down the ultimate foundation for the social sciences. And following the first question you asked, Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments, which I've been studying for the last 35 years, lays down a theory of behavior which combines these three elements I mentioned. There is a question of reason where it talks about self-command and how one should express behavior in a proper way. There is an element of reason. There is an element of emotions where he talks about sympathy and in a sense of transporting oneself and putting oneself in the shoes of others, these emotions. And there is an element of ethics where he talks about virtues that arise from these elemental things that you have a rise of behavior, which we call ethical. So the ethical comes is the other facet of the emotions, and the emotions and reasons are the other facets of the ethical. So these three moments, the ethical, the emotional, and rationality, are really moments of the same bundle. And that comes so clear and crisp in my writings about Adam Smith.
You mentioned in an academic article a quite original and controversial statement. Justice is ultimately motivated by caring about one's interests to avoid a prisoner's dilemma problem. This idea of justice as self-serving is quite new. It's a transition from the idea of preventing others from suffering as I suffered to preventing myself from being placed in this scenario again. However, is social justice an exception to the statement, as social justice represents the idea of caring for people who are suffering in a situation that you are not involved in?
It's very nice that you distinguish justice from social justice. It is true that I strongly argue that justice is not does not arise from something called pro-social sentiments. It is not about the caring of others. Really, you ultimately care about your self-interest. And it's not. I'm not the first one to say it. David Hume, and I'm happy to be in his company, who argued that. Adam Smith did not go this direction, unfortunately. I think David Hume is better on the virtue of justice as being really, when you pursue justice, is that it stems from self-interest. When to avoid being cheated. So you will demand justice, and by the term justice is that what you demand of yourself, you demand of others, so you use the same standard. That is really a key idea, that to make sure we avoid double standards in when we press demands based on justice. As to social justice, you are actually examining the whole community. And there are outcomes in the community that a result of collective effort of producing a good. So there's the division of labor, there are institutions, there is a collective use of natural resources, of capital, and what happens as a result, there could be situations where, that could be, but definitely there will be situations where some people will have a greater share of the pie, which is fine depending on how I don't want to go into details into my work on this idea, but basically that there is a benefit from having stratification, and that some people do better than other people. And I don't want to go into that to justify it, but this could go beyond what is optimal. So even my idea of social justice, really I specify what is the optimal distribution which allows for stratification and classes where some people earn more than other people. But at the same time, that idea of optimal, that there is a possibility that a society could reach a suboptimal position where the inequality becomes beyond what is optimal. And so we demand redistribution. And so really, as I started, there's a difference between justice and social justice, but actually it comes to the same framework of trying to decide what is the when we decide what is the optimal distribution. Really, the two concepts collapse again into one generic concept of how do we divide the products of the division of labor.
In another journal, you reflect on the writings of Adam Smith. The man of humanity in Europe should feel more benevolence towards his finger than the millions of people who perished in China as a result of an earthquake. This is the case because the man in Europe is more familiar with his finger than the people in China. This reminds me of certain news broadcasts in Australia. How can we encourage individuals to care about issues beyond their immediate realm? Or is it simply human nature to not give much significance to issues that do not affect your own welfare?
It is actually part of human nature to care more about one's finger than millions of people who have perished in Ecuador or in China. And Adam Smith, that's fine, and it's optimal actually, because you cannot do much about the suffering of people in Ecuador or China, except nowadays, of course, you could do something. But it is from an efficiency point of view, you should care about things that you have more control over. And if you do not take care of your injured finger, really it's hard for others to take care of it. So you are really, nature demands of you to take care of your own issues. There is the old adage from our grandmother saying there is nothing scratches your back than your own fingernails. And the idea is that it bestows upon us from nature, which Adam Smith, some scholars argue that he meant by the deity or God, is that we take care of ourselves. So really Adam Smith became the advocate of capitalism. It came down because he reinvented self-interest. For 1,000 years, even from the time of Plato, was seen self-interest as being sinful and obnoxious. And he says, no, really, the pursuit of self-interest is a virtue, because you taking care of yourself, and taking care of yourself is beneficial for you as an organism. And so you should care about what is immediate to you than others. By the way, this quote about millions of people perishing in a China earthquake, he was making a deeper point, that he turns around and says, this simple man of Europe, he cares more about his finger, but then if there is a devil appears to him and say, listen, I could save your finger by killing millions of people, or even one person. So he gives him a kind of a devilish paradox. Would you do it? And says, no, the fact that we say that it is natural to care about your finger than millions of people does not translate into the devil's choice that I'll save your finger if you let me kill so many people. He says then the principles of justice appears. And so he was trying to say that justice springs from a different foundation than sympathy. And that comes to my earlier point, that justice really is about, to start with, is self-interest. And the reason you don't want the devil to kill many people in China is not, that's not Adam Smith speaking, it is me speaking, is that also then people in China would turn around and say, oh, to save our fingers, we want so many Europeans to be killed. So there could be a social contract where say, all right, we're not going to committed transgression against each other. We'll have a pact that we observe one's rights, because it really serves ultimately my self-interest that others will not commit aggression against me in order to gain few benefits or even lots of benefits. So we have a pact as a humanity, and that's really the basis of international relations in the modern world, how international law has evolved, is to have these rules, since we are human beings cognitively capable of having weapons. We could inflict enormous pain on each other, so we better have peaceful coexistence. And peaceful coexistence springs exactly from concern of self-interest. So ultimately, the issue here is really about the distinction between justice and altruism. Now, coming to your motivating question, is that what about making greater awareness to people who suffer in third world countries or other places than my own concern? Here we could do something, and of course communication and media help us bring the problems overseas to our own living rooms, and we start to feel that, yes, I'm concerned about my finger, I'm also concerned about the finger of my neighbor, I'm also concerned about the acquaintances, and these acquaintances become less unfamiliar and become more familiar, and that really promotes benevolence, and which we see in so many nonprofit organizations who try to help victims of natural disasters or of epidemics or endemic diseases and so on.
In terms of evolutionary traits, most neo-Darwinian theorists make the allowance that altruism can occur if it benefits the inclusive fitness of the individual or the individual's wider community. From an evolutionary perspective, altruism only makes sense if such a behaviour can increase the fitness of the individual more than selfish, non-altruist behaviour. But humans, many argue, do not live in a naturalist selection environment. So, what case can ever be made to justify altruistic behaviour? That is, if altruism is in the interest of the individual, why should individuals still engage in altruism?
That is very true, that in evolutionary biology in the 1960s, they came up with the inclusive fitness hypothesis, where really when an organism, from ants to rabbits, the parents take care of the offspring, it's really out because offspring carry their own genes, so it was called selfish gene by Dawkins. That really you are taking care of the offspring because they carry a gene that you are interested in making sure that it survives. And in modern world, and this trait is selected through natural selection. Now, in a human society, some people argue that we don't have natural selection. I might go even a little bit further and say, excuse me 1 second here, we started by assumption that these traits have appeared through natural selection. It might also not be true, and I try to argue that in my other writings in biology, concerning animal behavior, is that it's not really the mechanism that we should start with. That leads me to the issue that really altruism should not be seen as an inclusive fitness, because the inclusive fitness idea, if we import it into economics and social theory, it translates into saying, all right, I want to give to the poor because it makes me feel good, and making me feel good is what I want to maximize my own utility. So it becomes self-centered, egoistic giving. And actually that's what Gary Becker, who won the Nobel Prize in 1992, argues, that really the inclusive fitness hypothesis in biology corresponds with his theory of altruism, is that I have taste for my own good, which includes giving to some other people who I enjoy seeing. And perversely, what that means is that I might give some money to some gangsters to inflict pain on some people, and then I show up on the scene giving them goodies where these suffering people will feel good, and then I could be feeling ecstatic. And actually, Thomas Hobbes, who wrote in 1650, exactly that's how he thought about altruism, that is ultimately self-enjoyment. It's not really springing from really caring about the others. It's really you care about getting high on the goods you have, and if it's inflicting pain on others, it is really fine in order for you to come in as a savior. And this is perverse. I thought the inclusive fitness hypothesis and the Beckerian theory of altruism. And I've been showing and arguing that, wait a minute, Adam Smith had a better theory where when he talked about sympathy, which I mentioned earlier, is putting oneself in someone else's shoes. And so really there is a foundation for why we should be involved in altruism, and that is not because of any Darwinian reasoning, but rather that we are capable of transporting ourselves and putting ourselves in someone else's shoes. And modern neuroscience in the last 20 years have discovered something called mirror neurons, where there's an area in our brain that really does not distinguish between our body and the body that we are observing. And that tells us that really it is a misnomer to think of the self as well contained as the last 300-400 years of social theory have assumed, self-contained within its own skin, that the self is very much a product of imagining what one's self is, and its boundary could include other people, depends on one's imagination and ability to transport oneself into someone else's shoes.
The practical scientific belief distinction is the idea that two kinds of maximization can exist side by side. The practical belief representing maximizing well-being, and the scientific belief of maximizing the truth for its own sake. However, in society, your distinction between these two kinds of objectives cannot explain the ongoing controversy and political debates about the direction of a country, the values of a good society, and why some religious beliefs cannot be entertained. It seems that your paper on this issue, which appeared in Theory and Decision, cannot answer how to proceed in such debates, or if the issue is about truth. How could you argue that political and religious debates are in fact about truth?
That is true that this paper you mentioned in Theory and Decision talks about two kinds of maximization. I think that I have a note there that there is this other issue as we aspire and to define the direction of a society. What should we aspire to as a society? What kind of religion that we should adopt, or secular religion, which we call modern values we should adopt, is not actually part of maximization. That's why I don't discuss it in that paper. I discuss it in another paper, which I call the Bayesian Fallacy, published in the Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization, around maybe a year earlier, where I talk about the origin of convictions about one's destiny, or the destiny of one's country, or about one's God, and that these beliefs are not really subject to Bayesian updating, as the case with scientific and truth belief. So if you want to cut the cake at first sight, we should say, all right, there are two kinds of beliefs, one concerning religion and politics and the direction and the ability of a country to, or one's own even family, or one's own career. These beliefs, I call them convictions, which are not really scientific to start with. And there are the other beliefs which are subject to truth issues. Now, these beliefs are subject to truth issues. One, we could then come back to this issue that they are subject to maximization. One, maximization, if you are interested in truth in its own sake, then I argue that cannot be substituted with other immediate goods, because really the objective here is truth, and so we should stop at the level of producing the best, the optimal belief, which is truth. And there's another one which really, we are not really interested in truth per se, but we are interested in finding out certain regularities in order to help us build a bridge, in order to solve practical problem and be able to make it to the other side of a river, for example, to get some resources. So here is, I'm interested in my well-being. And here I'm not really interested in truth per se, but only insofar as it helps me getting to the other side of the bridge. And that's a concern of engineering, and that's really the focus of all kind of professional schools, from nursing, medicine, business, that really they are interested in truth only to a point as far as it fulfills and maximizes one's well-being.
In one of your academic journal articles in the Review of Social Economy, you refer to the gift paradox. What is this gift paradox?
The gift paradox is that it's a paradox I'm confronting my fellow economists who subscribe to the idea that there's a single utility function. We could just jam it with all kind of tastes. So I have a taste for ice cream, for certain features of a house. I have a taste for some aesthetics from clothing. And also I have a taste, they say, oh, gifts, oh, sure, we'll add gifts in there. So if we model gift giving as just an ordinary taste like all other material tastes, gives us a paradox, is that people very much openly talk about the cost of an extra addition to the house, or what is the cost of clothing relative to the benefits. So we talk about cost and benefit to all these different goods that give us utility. But when it comes to the gift, we hide the price. When we give a gift to someone, we don't show them the price. We don't tell them about the trouble. It is tacky. Of course, you could say, oh, we give gift cards, which has the money. But when we do that, we do not tell the person, oh, this is how much it troubled me to earn that money. It is considered distasteful. So wait a minute, I'm saying, why is it distasteful to reveal more information which is available? Why is it better to suppress information which is really not efficient according to standard economic theory, that if you have information you should reveal it, since revealing it is zero cost to me? Why do I remove the price tag? Why is it tacky when I want to give my girlfriend or my wife a gift? Why is it tacky to throw the gift at her? I should present it and wrap it. And even the wrap is more important than the content. So what is the wrap about? What is trying to convey? First thing, you remove the pricing. Second, you put it in a wrap that is appropriate to the occasion. So what kind of emotions you are trying to express? And so it's paradoxical if you move along the utilitarian, strict standard utilitarian approach. It's paradoxical that people actually care about not appearing tacky or distasteful. And I tease my fellow economists that we have really to rethink rational choice theory and the theory of utility maximization to accommodate this fact or aspects of a human conduct.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.